It is in a closet or in a heap. I'm not sure exactly. It's somewhere. We have it. The robe is not handy at the moment. And that was, that's kind of a milestone for people who are pursuing a career in ministry. But my question next week is, what if all of us have a career in ministry? What if I'm not all alone in this mission to serve? So we're going to talk. So we're going to talk a whole bunch about that next week. I'm excited. Please join us for that. I'm looking forward to that message, and apparently so is my wife. And today I'm going to take a look at us as a church. I just mentioned I was ordained a few weeks ago, and it was the next morning. So it was part of the big conference that all the Methodists in Minnesota get together every year, and we do our ordinations and our retirements, and we also gather for worship and planning and even legislation. Hey, how about that? And one thing, I'm going to move this mic. Just realized that's in the way of Facebook. Hey, sorry about that, Facebook. We always, every year, they draw a name out of a bowl of any one of the fully ordained elders in the annual conference, and they give the keynote sermon the following year. So they've got a whole year to be anxious about it. It's pretty cool. And this past year, this past conference, the conference preacher was my good friend and former colleague, Bill Eves, who was the pastor at the Anoka United Methodist Church just across town until a couple years ago. And he gave a fantastic message. And he started off by talking about two football players. And if you know anything about Bill Eves, you would find that incredibly shocking. But he talked about two football players. And I want to talk to you about these two football players as well as we lean into what this church is about. The first one is named Tim Tebow, and you've probably heard of him. He is well known for taking a knee. So well known for taking a knee that it's actually been given his name to Tebow, right? To, upon victory, take a knee in reflection and prayer, right? To thank God for the blessings of this momentous success, right? And Tim Tebow is also well known for his Christian faith. He's very outspoken about it. You can see him preaching at conferences and churches all across the country. Now that his football career has come to an end, he often quotes the Bible, and he makes it very clear that football isn't first in his life, that his faith ranks higher, and that football is an afterthought. Now, I actually saw a meme floating around this past week, and it had Tim Tebow's face, and next to it were the words, "Nike, you picked the wrong kneeler." And those of you who know where I'm going with this can hear who I'm going to talk about next, because there's the other kneeler they're talking about is Colin Kaepernick. Colin Kaepernick, also a former quarterback in the NFL, also famous for taking a knee. But instead of taking a knee in prayer in the end zone, Colin Kaepernick would take a knee during the national anthem. Something you might not know about Colin Kaepernick is that he's black, was raised by a white family in Wisconsin in a United Methodist home. He also has a deep faith. He has scripture tattooed all over his arms. And it was in that faith that he was raised, he learned the value of justice. And so when he realized the epidemic of police brutality against people of color in our country, he needed to say something. And that conversation is happening in a louder, more visible way than it would have been without him. No matter what you think about what he's doing, we're having the conversation ongoing years later in our country thanks to him taking a knee during a national anthem. And so even if you don't like the act itself, we all should be appreciative that we're having a valuable conversation, however it falls. Colin Kaepernick also makes it very clear that football isn't first in his life. In fact, because of his actions during a national anthem, he does not have a football career right now. And the problem is, just like that meme says, there's a lot of cultural pressure to choose one kneeler or the other, and you can't have both. Do you feel that way a little bit culturally? That you can't like both Tim Tebow, who takes a knee for Jesus, and Colin Kaepernick, who takes a knee for the plight of the oppressed. That's the pressure, that's the tension that our culture lives in right now. Are you going to stand up for holiness, or are you going to stand up for justice? Which cause brings you to your knees? That's the question that's kind of looming over us, and the call to choose one way or the other. And the fact is, about 100 years ago, these very categories fractured much of American Christianity as well. Whole denominations, including the Methodist denomination, were split into 2 or 3 or 4 as they fought about the proper way to live out their faith. Is it all about loving God or all about loving your neighbor? And the sad fact is, they were both right. It's all about loving God, and it's all about loving your neighbor. And we heard about it just a minute ago. When Jesus was asked, what is the greatest command? Jesus said, love the Lord your God, right, with all your heart and all your mind and all your strength. But he didn't stop there. He said, and then the second one is just like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. So loving your neighbor as yourself is just like loving God. And it makes total sense. If you believe that God breathed life into us, then every person you meet has God within them. And when you love them, you love God. It's not that different. It's not as different as people want to make it seem. Jesus didn't say either love God or love your neighbor. Jesus didn't say some are God lovers and some are neighbor lovers. Jesus described the greatest commandment as love your God and love your neighbor both. And as a Methodist church, this is at the core of our tradition as well. Both personal and social holiness. That's a teaching that goes all the way back to the founder of our movement, John Wesley. He said, to have a deep and abiding faith, you need to be present in the world and present to God. Another way he talked about it was that they were both works of piety, works of holiness for yourself, and works of mercy, showing how merciful God is in the ways that you live out your faith in the world. And it's this both-and kind of Christianity. Not an either-or Christianity, but a both-and Christianity that we've been living into as a church. It's why we've taken this big leap of faith, trimming our staff, unleashing the power of our partners. That's you, by the way. We're all partners in this, to be the people who really make ministry happen. That's why we moved, to adjust our budget and to fit our priorities, to have neighbors that we can love in a different kind of way here, to use less of our resources just on ourselves and to offer more of what we have to our neighbors. And that's why I want to take just a little bit of time to talk through exactly what this new structure is going to look like. All right, and I've got some handouts. It's about time for that. So I've got some handouts that you can see. Oh, Julie, I got it. Handouts coming around that have a little pictorial representation of how this is all going to work. All right. So we've divided most of the things that we do into 2 categories that we're calling intention and extension. And you heard Lori talk about extension just a little bit ago. I'll start off by talking about intention, all right? But there are so in each of these categories, there are going to be various teams and individuals who are going to work together to dream up ways of living out these 2 dimensions of faith and to bring them into reality. And to say they're not different, they're just different ways of thinking about and getting at the very same thing. On the intention side, there's worship, of course. This is part of getting our hearts straight with God, aligning our intentions with the intentions of God in the world and in our hearts. But there's also a newly forming contemplation team that will include Jenny and myself and others that will keep asking questions and exploring possibilities for spiritual practices as a church. This also includes our new book study that you just heard about, and other studies, Bible studies, book studies that'll spring up along the way. And all these things are here to set our intentions in the right place, to focus our hearts and our minds so that our actions grow out of a place that's right, a place that's true and beautiful and spiritual and holy, to focus our hearts and minds so that the actions grow out of a place of authenticity and strength. Like the roots of a tree sink deep into the soil for strength and nourishment, these spiritual practices will keep us grounded and give us the nutrients we need to grow. And we're looking for people who are interested in helping to plan and lead in this area. And if that's you, I'm going to ask you to talk to Jenny at the end of the service today. You know how to find her. She's the one who plays piano. And then there's extensions that Lori was just mentioning today. But this isn't just about doing extensions, that the work we have previously referred to as outreach. But there's so many ways that we reach out. And what we want to do with this word extension is to show that it's just the way that our intentions look when we live them out in the world. And so it isn't just about doing. When the branches of a tree stretch out to offer their fruit to the world, they also open up to receive the sun's rays. And so we believe that when we go into the world to serve, we don't bring God to some place that God wasn't already. We go and serve in the world to discover a face of God that we've never met before. We meet God in our neighbors of every color and nationality, in every tax bracket, in every sexual orientation and gender identity. We encounter God when we interact with others. And that's why we just find it so life-giving. Like, why am I so exhausted and yet I feel so good after serving? Have you ever wondered that? It's because you met God. That's why. It's because you had a divine encounter when you offered yourself in love and sacrifice. But the question remains, should we sink our roots deep in the love of God, or should we stretch out our branches and love our neighbor? And the answer has always been 100% yes to both. Both. Now, you'll notice on your picture, on your graphic, there's also a trunk on this tree. There's roots, there's branches, and then there's this trunk in the middle. That's the structures that form a solid structure for everything else to flourish. So we've got finance, we've got building and grounds, we've got things like that that help form structures so that those other things can grow. And when we first floated this crazy new vision for changing everything, perhaps you remember there were 3 phases in that letter that we shared at the end of that service that one day. There were change of location. Check, right? Here we are. There was change of structure. You've got it in your hot little hands right now. And we're leaning into that and still unpacking how all that's going to work. But we've got the core of it ready to go. And there was one more thing. You remember what it was? Oh, you've been paying attention. Good. Yes, we're gonna change the name of the church too to reflect all of this. And I want to share a little story with you. It was, I guess, probably 3 months ago now. Was it 3 months? 2 months ago? 2 or 3 months ago, when all of the changes were becoming officially official. I guess it had to have been more than, it was like 3 months ago. I'll stop wondering about the time out loud and tell you what I'm going to tell you. Jenny and I were invited to sit before the cabinet of the United Methodist Church in Minnesota. So that's the bishop and all of the district superintendents all in one room asking us questions about what the heck you think you're doing with this church. We felt the exact same way. Like, nervous laughter. But it really was an encouraging time as the bigwigs heard our heart and really affirmed that God is up to something here. And offered their support in any way that they can. And we're like, I don't know. And then they wanted to end by praying for Jenny and I. And they had us sit, and they gathered around us and laid their hands on us in prayer. It was really beautiful. And as they were praying for us, and I didn't find this out till after the fact, of course. Jenny told me on the car ride home, as they were praying for us, I was asking that God would just give us a name for this new thing. Because everything else seemed, well, not clear, but like we knew the direction, right? we didn't know where exactly it was going to land or how it was going to get there, but we knew the direction, except for this name thing. And I had always had this sense when I heard the right name, I'd know it. We'd had a meeting with our leadership team, and just before, just a few days before this, and we threw a bunch of options out there, and nothing really stuck. Like, to the point they were like, do we have to? And I was like, yes, we have to. But we'll keep talking about this. And as Jenny was praying that God would just give us a name, as the cabinet was gathered around us, laying their hands on us, a name dropped into my head. And as I've been handing it out to people, some of you have kind of heard along the way, like, what about this? It is stuck every single time. So it ties everything together. Loving God and loving neighbor, personal holiness and social holiness, being present to our community. It's the action and the contemplation. Roots and branches. That's our new identity. Roots and branches. Roots and branches. Now, it doesn't sound churchy, but if you look around, we don't look that churchy. It's something that says who we are in a lot of different ways. It's the roots of loving God and the branches of loving our neighbor. It's the roots of personal holiness and the branches of social holiness. It's the roots of our historic faith and the branches of growing out in new ways of living it in the world. Now, we aren't it's not like, as of today, we're roots and branches, bye. It doesn't work that way. Because we have signs and websites and things like that all have to come into line. Neat thing, though, is we were given a grant by the General Board of Communication, that's the national church, for graphic design and printed materials of various kinds. So in the coming months, we will be rolling out logo and name in more public ways, and we hope to launch in September or October this new name. As a public face that we can then invite people to in this new way. One last thing I want to mention is, so it's roots and branches and not necessarily church. It's roots and branches. On all the signs and whatever we print, it's just going to say roots and branches. And then when you invite someone, or when they see something, you're wearing a shirt or you have a material and they say roots and branches, what's that? And then you get to tell them everything. Instead of roots and branches church, and they're like, oh, it's a church. I can assume from my experience in churches in the past exactly what you're about and either choose to try it or reject you because I don't like church. But instead you can say, Roots and Branches is a church that's about loving God and loving neighbor in equal measure because we believe they're both important. That's why there's Roots and Branches. How's that work? And not only do we get to tell people what we're about, but then we can prove that God loves them in the ways that we love them. So as Reverend Bill Eves said at annual conference, we can take a knee like Tim Tebow and Colin Kaepernick. We can make a bold statement about our love for God and a bold statement about our love for the people in this world. After all, we do have two knees, so we can take a knee on both sides of this aisle. And when people wonder about why so many churches are shrinking and closing their doors, I know it's because they're not saying the claims of the church aren't true anymore. It isn't because the music isn't good enough. And it isn't because the sermons aren't good enough. People are leaving the church because there's a massive disconnect. Those who just want to save souls can do a better job of it without a church. They could just go out on a street corner and in every corner of their life spend their Sunday mornings out in the world and saving souls. And those who want to do community service, man, the church just gets in the way. We've got all kinds of clunky, financial and bureaucratic machinery that you got to work around. Both of those tasks alone are actually a lot easier without a church. But to do this task, to do this job of to be deeply grounded in the divine reality that God is up to something in the world, and the truth that we are the ones called to carry it out, that takes a community. We can't do it on our own. And that's why the world still needs the church. That's why so many of you have given so much to make this next stage of our church become a reality. That's why this church is in this neighborhood at this time. To be a both and church. To be both roots and branches. Who's with me? All right. All right. Pray with me. God, we are entering into a continued stage of the unknown. And we open our hearts to you and whatever comes next. We ask us that you would move within us. Give us the wisdom and strength to push down deep our roots of faith. And give us the energy and the love to stretch out boldly with love into this world. Stir within us and create something new in this place among these people. Amen.